Welcome to the Diversity Connector podcast, where we explore the rich tapestry of human experiences. I'm your host, Gertrude Mache, and I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the country on which we meet today. I would also like to pay my respects to elders, past, present, and emerging, and together as we dive into conversations that bridge cultures, challenge stereotypes, and celebrate the unique perspectives each of us brings to the table. Each episode is a journey through stories and insights from a kaleidoscope of voices, each sharing their colorful narrative. Whether you're at home, on the go, or just anywhere in between, you're now part of a community that values understanding, inclusivity, and the beauty of diversity. So plug in your headphones, get comfortable, and let's connect through the power of our shared stories. Welcome, and thank you for joining us on the Diversity Connector podcast. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Diversity Connector. This is Gertrude Mache here in beautiful Melbourne, Australia. And today I am graced with the presence of yet another amazing sister. Welcome, welcome, welcome to our tribe. Please tell everybody your full name, where you're based, and share your story with us today.
Hi, all, and thank you, Gertrude, for inviting me to your program. I'm so excited to be here to talk about just my journey and my path of being a social entrepreneur. Basically, I'm a returnee. So I grew up, first of all, my name is Florence Adu, and I am a Ghanaian American. I grew up in Denver, Colorado, and now I'm based in Accra and in Brooklyn, New York, where I am right now. And my story is, I guess, nuanced with the fact that my parents migrated to the U.S., like many immigrants, for opportunity, for school, for education. And so that was always very important to us and our family. So went to great schools, had a wonderful education. The thing that stood out for me as I went into grad school and I studied urban policy and economics was going abroad and seeing, particularly visiting Ghana, and seeing that the education system left something to be desired, but also recognizing that I felt a bit lost because I didn't have that mother tongue. My parents migrated to the U.S. at a time when there was global change for people of the African diaspora. Africa was being liberated for the most part. And then you had the civil rights movement in the US. And so my parents opted not to have us speak their mother tongue. So they spoke it with each other, but they didn't speak it with us. And so going back, I always, wanted to, and I obviously picked up some of the language, but I'm definitely not a fluent speaker. And so when I started to go to Ghana and recognizing the difference between myself and my family, my peers, I realized that there is a way to learn the language as an adult and for children of the diaspora to have access. And as I looked deeper into it, I recognized that the education system is still very colonized. And so what I set out to do was start my company, which is Leap Transmedia. That's what I do in Ghana. I create educational and informational content for children and families. And what we're focused on primarily for early learners is mother tongue instruction. What stands out to me in the education system in many African countries, and particularly in Ghana, is that a large part of the education starts with teaching children a foreign language to start. So they're not learning one in Ga, Ekome, or in Chi. They're learning it in English. So making the symbolic representation between one, the letter, and one, the name, with what they understand to be something entirely different, creates a real roadblock to long-term cognition and literacy. And so what we set out to do was create a relationship with Sesame Workshop. And so we have a relationship with Sesame Workshop to distribute their content on a local level, particularly in Hausa language initially, but eventually we'll look to be doing more of overall distribution in Ghana. And so the idea was, growing up, I watched Sesame Street. I grasp English well. People move to the US. People all over the world learn different languages using Sesame Street. So that's kind of our framework for how we approach creating content for early learners. And so I won't say that it's easy, because, as I mentioned, the colonial mindset means that parents also think English is better. So why do we need to teach our children how to write in our local languages? They won't use it. Well, if we demand that our languages are priority as opposed to English or the languages of or French or the languages of our other colonizers, then we have a whole different situation in terms of our abilities to empower ourselves and write our own histories and tell our own stories. And so we started in 2013. So since 2013, I've been on that mission. It has not been easy, I have to say. It's been self-funded. So in my other life here in New York, I have a property management business company, and I manage real estate and construction projects, primarily now in the education sector. I actually build schools. I work with charter schools in New York City, and I work with them to identify real estate, assemble teams for construction, and facilitate the build out and move in for those businesses. I also manage family properties in Accra and Colorado and here in New York. And so the built environment has always also been something very important to me. And so part of what the work that we do at Leap, or a project that we've worked on, is a variety children's program called the Mofer Channel. And that's a co-production with Animax FYB, a studio that's based in Ghana and in Accra. And the Mofer Channel is a 1 hour variety program, similar to what you might find on Sesame Street. We have about 8 programs from early learners to adolescents. And why I started mentioning that is that we have a program called Green Encyclopedia, which is about learning about plants and the environment and how to apply those plants practically in our everyday lives. Other of our programs are We Love Learning. So it's focused on character building and also a little bit of Afrofuturism. We have a eco superhero, Captain Z, who is also part of the lineup. That's available on Amazon Prime. So look for Mofer Channel, MMFRO Channel. And that stands for Mofer is children in tree. And so that's something that we're also doing and really trying to spread the word. I will say that the challenge is beyond even just the funding and the families, starts to be around meeting families where they are. Again, we always think everyone has a phone, everyone has a television, everyone has all of these things, and those are great. But many children in Africa, they still are just struggling to find pen and paper. So a lot of our work is also identifying ways that we can deliver tangible teaching and learning tools to teachers in classrooms and to families and communities. And so I'd say that's a big part of what my background is. I'm also an avid I take my health very seriously. I actually just got in from a run. It's kind of chilly, but I like to get those in. I ran track and field when I was in university, and so I continue to do that. I do yoga. I just really think that our mental states help us to be better for those around us and for ourselves in general. And what I also do is I host a podcast. It is called Glocal Citizens. And the podcast celebrates the diversity and the impact that diasporans have living in and on the continent. So there's new episodes every Tuesday at glocalcitizenspod.com. And that's really a wonderful opportunity for me to learn all the time. So interviewing all of these guests from around the African continent and US. I have guests from all over the world, I can say. And it's really been wonderful just kind of understanding the context of doing business, starting a life, and being a glocal citizen.
Wow, Florence, what a journey you've been on. Listening to you speak, I can so relate to all of the challenges that you've come upon so far.
Mhm.
As you know, I'm from Zimbabwe. I brought up my kids here in Australia, New Zealand. And sometimes it's difficult to maintain a language when you don't hear it spoken every day, correct?
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
And most kids just want to conform, they don't want to sound different,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
to assimilate the culture that they're immersed in at this very moment in time.
Mm-hmm.
So you have a rich background spanning from a variety of sectors, including real estate development, media, education, amongst others. How has your diverse career path influenced your approach to promoting diversity and inclusion within the industries where you've worked?
Um, that's a really good question, and I'll start with real estate. Real estate, as we know, is a very male-dominated industry and
Yes.
sector, and so I have been the project manager on many a project where it's men speaking. I mean, it's basically the question that I have to ask them is, are you going to listen to me, or are you going to not have the job? Because it literally would come down to that often. And so as much as I can, I often talk to young ladies. I hire female contractors as much as possible. Even in Ghana, I'm renovating one of a property now, and the terrazzo, the flooring contractor, is a woman, which made me so happy to be able to do that. So I really seek out women, particularly in the building and real estate sector, to work with me on projects. I look at capacity building for young professionals as project managers. And as much as like looking for interns to do a lot of the, the building blocks to becoming a full-on professional. And so in the media side of things, because we're Africans, I'm doing this in Africa. It's less of a diversity and inclusion for, in terms of background and culture, as much as it is for, again, women, and finding spaces for women to be parts of productions, because typically we're the talent, we're not the sound, we're not the engineers, we're not those types of professionals. So as much as I can, I also look for production partners that have women as part of their teams, and are focused on, actually, particularly in the animation space, it's always a lot of young guys. And so I'm happy to work with Francis Brown at Animax FYB, because he always has opportunities for young women to be part of the team as well.
That's fantastic. It's really good to see representation.
Mm.
So, as a social entrepreneur, you focused on bridging the gap between businesses and communities in emerging African markets. Can you share a success story where your initiatives significantly impacted a community?
I can. What I can say is, a few years ago, around World Malaria Day, which is April 25th, I believe. We were doing some distribution of some content with another partner, Ubongo Media, Ubongo Kids. They're based out of Tanzania. And so working with, we were looking for different kinds of organizations to help promote the content, to make sure kids knew, where the mosquito, put up the mosquito netting and things like that. And so we just decided we're going to do our own community event. So literally in my mother's neighborhood in Jamestown, Accra, I was able to find an organization called the Street Children's Empowerment Foundation. And what they do is they work with street children to get them off the streets. And street children, I think, has a little bit of a different connotation in the African, or in this context, than maybe what we think about in, the West. Like, street children are usually like children that don't have families and don't have, someone who's taking care of them. These are street children that just don't have the funds to go to school. So no one is paying for their school fees. And so what this organization does is they take those children, they might be hawkers, or whatever the case may be, like working on the streets in a different way, and they provide them with educational opportunities. So in partnership with them and also a local business called Peony that develops mosquito repellent. So it's a skincare line. We were able to put together basically a fun day where we were screening the malaria videos, as well as partnering with an environmental organization called Environment 360 to distribute. They have a booklet and coloring materials so that the kids had an activity to kind of envision and imagine themselves as a malaria fighter. And so we're able to bring together the not-for-profits as well as the business to kind of expose everyone to their products in an area where they could use those products. And so that was a win. It was a really nice opportunity to see all of that come together. And the children enjoyed it all. They all got free stuff.
So it sounds like you have managed to do quite a lot in the community around the children, which is great.
Mm-hmm.
So through your Glocal Citizens podcast, you've had conversations with diverse individuals making global impacts. What have been some of the key takeaways about diversity and inclusion from your guests that have resonated with you or influenced your work?
Being a podcast host, I think you also know this, is listening. That's the first key takeaway, is really allowing people to use their voice and listen and hear that first. So that's number one. Another one is to be unafraid to experiment, because a lot of the ability to be able to understand what inclusion is to take a leap a little bit of, let's try this, let's see if it works. It doesn't have to be foolproof, but there's something in, the scientific method of let's ask ourselves a question and then go through the process of figuring out, okay, this works or that works, or this doesn't work or that works. So being experimental is something that really rings as a theme that I hear quite a bit amongst my guests. And I would say persistence as well. So, being in cultures that are not familiar to you, it's easy to give up and just say, oh, well, I can't do this anymore. So it's really important in spaces where you may not initially feel involved or included, is, giving it a little bit of a chance, like persisting in a way that can assist you to be a part of something.
Your Flirt with the World initiative
Mm.
seeks to connect businesses with people in emerging African markets.
Mm-hmm.
How does FWTW specifically address diversity and inclusion? And what unique challenges have you encountered in this work?
So I'll give you a little bit of background on that. So that was a brainchild of myself and two of my good friends. One is my world traveler friend. She's been all over the globe and worked on various types of projects. And so just taking that knowledge of the diversity of, there's the diversity of ways of being and doing things that still boils down to basic human needs in a lot of situations, and then basic human behavior in a lot of situations. And so what we wanted to do is to address the need for women to be empowered for their reproductive health, because everywhere around the world you go, it's a man trying to tell a woman how to do what they need to do for their health, many places in the world. And so for our initial launch, we launched with a 1 million condom giveaway, and that featured female condoms as one of the big donations that we were doing, or giveaways that we were promoting in the communities. And so it was really interesting the way that the communities, we did this in Ghana, in Accra, and the way that people initially received us was very much like, oh, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? But once we were on the street, trust that we were cleaned out from the female condoms, from the male condoms. We made these great little flirt packages that had information and resources about local resources for Planned Parenthood, HIV/AIDS prevention, as well as just peer counseling, that type of all those types of tools. And instructions on how to use those tools. And
Yes.
then that evolved into a book that we produce. It's called Love Safely. And so that was a manual kind of teaching people what they don't know about their reproductive health. And how to flirt with the world. There's a lot of stigma around being free and open about your sexuality, and which makes it a bit taboo to be empowered by that. And so that was a big part of our work, is to try to change the narrative around being empowered, particularly for women and young girls. And so
Mhm.
I think we were definitely effective in doing that in Ghana. We haven't come back to it since issuing the book and doing our second round of giveaways in New Orleans, which is also an area. I think if people are familiar with what's going on in the U.S. after or around Roe v. Wade, Louisiana is a state that has very, very, very archaic ideas and laws
Yes.
around reproductive health. And so
Mhm.
we were aware of that, and we went there and did a giveaway, and that too was also very successful in working with not-for-profits to get out the word and just help people to take take uh take the lead in their reproductive health.
I love it. So, your work in creative direction,
Mhm.
product development, and media production spans a wide creative spectrum. How do you incorporate the themes of diversity and inclusion in your creative process and outputs?
I would say that because I'm so focused on creating for African viewers and African or across the diaspora, I think
Yeah.
that in itself, I think we also often think of diversity and inclusion being about relations between people of color and people that are not of color. And I
Yes.
think that within the diaspora, there's so much about, people talk about tribalism, but we have so many cultures within the African diaspora.
Yes.
And so I think that just the fact that I like to incorporate just even different thematics around cultures across Ghana. We have northern cultures. We have the central culture, Muslims, Christians, that kind of thing. So it's really just recognizing the diversity that is all around us and making sure that that is part of the stories that we create, so that nothing seems like it's very focused on a certain type or profile of person, but it really celebrates, like, this is where we live. We live in this huge melting of all kinds of, particularly Africans, in our spaces.
Yeah, in fact, a lot of people don't realize just how diverse the African race is
Mm,
when it goes to languages.
mhm.
I speak a very particular dialect of Shona. Shona is the main language in Zimbabwe. My dialect is called Karanga. And
Okay.
depending on which part of the country you're from, the dialect changes completely.
Mhm.
Like in the southern part of Zimbabwe, on the border of Zimbabwe and South Africa, we have another tribe called the Kalanga. And the
Mm,
difference between our two languages is, in my dialect, the Karanga have R's and no L's, and the Kalanga have L's and no R's in their dialect. So I can sit in a room with the Kalanga people. I can hear everything they're saying because my brain substitutes the
yeah,
R's and L's. I can understand what they're saying, but it's hard for me to jump in and contribute to the conversation. But
yeah,
these are the nuances of our languages, our cultures. We have such a wide, diverse group of people, of nations within
yeah,
Africa. And I think that's an important thing to highlight as well.
yeah, yeah. I want to bring up something about the R's and L's, because just working with languages, maybe it's an Africa thing, because in West Africa as well, the R's and L's are so different. And R's are kind of not really around. Like, I don't think the sound is not part of yeah. So, I mean, that you brought that up, I'm like, is that like a continental phenomenon?
That's something you and I should investigate, definitely.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
love it.
yeah.
So, when it comes to grant writing and fundraising,
Mhm.
how do you communicate the importance of diversity and inclusion to potential funders? And what strategies have proven most effective in securing support for diverse initiatives?
Well, I have to say that in targeting funders, I guess from the outset, I'm very focused on those kinds of funders that already value and are looking for the types of content that we produce and can produce. And so working with organizations like OSIWA, that's the Open Societies Foundation arm in West Africa, um, that kind of, it leaves less, you have to convince them less. So I feel like part of what our strategy is kind of looking at the lower hanging fruit, not having to say, oh, this is how we're focused on diversity and inclusion. Just the work speaks for itself. It already says that we recognize that we have all of these different needs amongst our populations, and we're not just this homogenous society just because we're all Black people. And so it is really just about, I want to say more about diversity and inclusion on a class level.
Yeah. Okay.
So then that's where we really kind of figure out, how are we targeting the masses? How are we targeting, working class people? How are we targeting middle class people, and so on and so forth? Where do we see the revenue streams coming from? How do we keep sustaining it? And so it's really thinking about what sustainability looks like.
I love that. So, what advice would you give aspiring social entrepreneurs who wish to make a significant impact in promoting diversity and inclusion through their ventures?
I would say that just being very aware of the environment that you are, like your audience, basically the target community that you're looking to serve, really needs to inform a lot of what you and how you want to approach doing the work that you do. So, for example, working with children, recognize, thinking about how do we, who are the influencers of children, and who are the influences of those parents. So, do you go directly to the child's sensibilities, or do you go more to the caretaker sensibilities? So really doing the market research of understanding who your market is, and then figuring out how that market may need a little bit of massaging to open up their purview of how they are looking for progress.
I like that. So, looking ahead, you've mentioned an interest in agriculture, infrastructure, industrial development in West Africa. How do you plan to integrate diversity and inclusion principles in these future projects?
Well, starting with farming. So that's the first piece of just getting the land and getting the land cultivated by and for, and looking at empowering. There's so many female farmers that I don't think many cultures recognize. And, you see all the pictures, and there's so many women who are in the agricultural sector that are overlooked because somehow the middleman is a man, or someone who's kind of exploiting them or figuring out a way to, marginalize their contributions. So in my vision, it is, as a storyteller, everything that I will be in from this point forward will always have a story that is available for others to observe and learn from. So I think that goes a long way in terms of promoting diversity and inclusion, just showing what it really looks like on the ground. And I think that's kind of the journalist in me to some extent, is really making sure that this is the process. This is what we do. This is what it is on the ground. And so really showing the work and how it's getting done.
Yeah, a lot of women are overlooked. Majority of African farms are manned by women. But like you say, at the end of the day, it always looks like the men are the ones who are really in charge. So finally, on a more personal note, how has your identity and experiences influenced your commitment to diversity and inclusion? And how do you stay motivated to continue this work amidst all the challenges? I can imagine growing up in the United States as a little Black African girl. What experiences did you have?
I would say that I was fortunate to grow up in a town. I grew up in Denver, Colorado, and I grew up in a very diverse community. And so I never felt like it wasn't until I became an adult and entered into the job market and even, not working in corporate, right? So when I was working in schools, I still didn't feel like any kind of like way. I felt like I could always be me. But when I entered a corporate environment where the expectations were for you to be part of a machine and play your role, and the roles were defined, then that really kind of probably set me on my path to be an entrepreneur, because I understood the limitations of the systems. So I think that challenging the system, divesting from systems, building our own systems, those are the solutions that are hard to think about. But until we start to decide that that's our way, I think that we won't find ourselves feeling whole.
So let's finish off with Afrofuturism. I was so glad you brought that up. Last year, I was invited to speak at an Afrofuturism conference in Brazil.
Interesting.
Unfortunately, didn't manage to go in person, but I did do a presentation online. Why is Afrofuturism such an important concept for us to dream and envisage a new world for African people, and particularly for Africans in the diaspora?
Yeah, I think it's exactly as I was just saying this, the idea of imagining a different system and being in a different system. It is the mother, for me, it's the mother of invention. So a lot of the projects I have in development are Afrofuture projects. I love science fiction. I love Octavia Butler. All of you can name any Black science fiction author, and I'm reading their stuff and really kind of glomming onto that, because I also believe that Afrofuturism is a way for us to also reflect on our histories, because our histories, in my mind, have been co-opted by the history of Europe. And so our own histories have so much mysticism and magic that we're leaving on the table, because we're not allowing ourselves to imagine a different past and be in a different present and see a different future. So I believe that the more that we emphasize the ideas in the Afrofuturism movement, and really kind of focus on that, is the way to inject and inspire more Africans to think outside the box, because I think that's what our real challenge has been, is that we're not thinking outside the box enough for us to come up with a new story about who we are.
Yeah, it's interesting. The premise of my presentation for this presentation in Salvador, Brazil, was a quote I read somewhere that said, they thought they had buried us, but they didn't realize that we were seeds. So
I love it.
To say that for a tree to survive, it has to scatter its seeds as far away from it as possible, right? So we are Africa's seeds. We've been dispersed through slavery, through wars, some of our economic refugees. We are all over the world, but wherever we have landed is fertile ground for us to build our lives there and to go back to the continent and make a difference, just like what you and I are doing with our lives. So I hope this is a message that we can spread with other Africans in the diaspora.
Yes.
That wherever you are in the right place. And I feel we're actually time travelers. Those of us who are out in Africa.
Absolutely.
We've got the knowledge, the skills that we need to rebuild the continent. And if a lot of us get this concept and we go back to our communities, Africa is going to be a completely different place in the next 20 years. We can leapfrog into the next century in a very big way. So
Yes.
I'm really excited about that.
Yes, me too. I am as well.
So thank you so much for coming online and sharing your story with us today and being with us this morning. Thank you to everybody who's tuned in. The Diversity Connector is bringing you voices of people from all over the world, diverse backgrounds, celebrating our diversity wherever we are. So tune in again tomorrow when I interview yet another amazing guest. In the meantime, have a fantastic day, morning, or evening, wherever you are in the world. And Florence, thanks again for the interview.
Thank you as well.
And that's a wrap, everybody, on today's episode of the Diversity Connector podcast. Thank you for tuning in and being part of our vibrant and global conversation. I'm your host, Gertrude Mache, and it's been an honor to share this space with you, where voices from all walks of life come together to weave a tapestry of diverse perspectives. Remember, every story you've heard today is a thread in the larger fabric of our shared humanity. So, as you step back into your world, carry these stories with you and let them inspire you to embrace and celebrate the rich diversity around us. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review our podcast to help us share these inspiring stories with more listeners. Do follow us on social media by looking for the Diversity Connector podcast for more updates. Until then, keep connecting, keep listening, and keep celebrating the beauty of diversity. This is the Diversity Connector podcast signing off. Stay curious, stay open, and definitely